Hi y'all, I'm Kiki. It is the start of 2026 when I'm filming this, so it is officially time to look back at the past year and do a little recap of my reading. I'm kind of doing like a wrap up, kind of like a Spotify wrapped. I saw, and I forgot her name, but I will try to find it and put it in this video. I saw another booktuber do this and I really liked it. I know a lot of people do tier ranking on the books they read in a year. I've been doing those throughout the year at the end of every quarter. So I haven't filmed my fourth quarter one yet, so I need to do that. I don't think it would make sense to go through that again. So if you're interested in that kind of video, I have those on my channel, but I thought I would do more of a wrapped. So we're going to do my 2025 reading wrap up, and the goal of this is to talk about as many books as I can, so I'm not going to be going super in depth with these, so don't take anything I say too seriously if I say something a little bit mean and snarky about your favorite book. It's not that deep. I'm just trying to give you as quickly as I can my general impressions of it. The other thing I just wanted to mention, this video might cut in and out depending on how much space I need on the screen to show you what I've actually made. So first we're going to go over some quick and dirty stats. I read 120 books this year. I didn't mean to do that. I don't go into a year with a certain book goal. This does average out to reading 10 books in a month, but again, that was not my goal. In fact, like the last 2 months, November and December, I think I probably read 8 books in that time period. So like the last 2 months of the year, I really slowed down and I wasn't really trying to put any pressure on myself. This is probably the most amount of books I've either read my entire life or at least since I was in like high school when I was reading constantly. So I do not expect to keep up with this pace every year. If next year I read half of this or even less than half of this, honestly, I would feel better about myself because that probably means I'm going out and being more social instead of just staying home and reading books. So that would probably be better for me. I did DNF 9 books, so that's not counted in the 120. In total, according to Storygraph, so take this with a grain of salt because it's not going to be perfect, I read 47,093 pages. And again, that actually sounds kind of terrifying because what do you mean I read almost 50,000 pages? I don't even know how to contextualize that. Like, what is that? That did mean my average book length was 392 pages. I would say this is about accurate. I read a lot of like thick, chunkier books at the beginning of the year. And then probably in like August, I was reading a lot more either mid-size, like 350 page books or like shorter. My average rating for the year was 3.88, which again, I think was pretty accurate to my overall idea of how my reading year went. I read a lot of books that I really, really liked or loved, and I didn't read that many stinkers. That's great. And I gave 21 books 5 stars. I only had 2 rereads. Beloved and Their Eyes Were Watching God were both rereads. I read both of those when I was in high school. And then this was the thing that surprised me, 34 books that I read were like part of a series. To be fair, almost half of this, so like 13 of these books I read was one series, so I finished like one big fantasy series this year. Almost half of the books were that series, but I was still surprised that I had read apparently like 17 other books, or even more, I can't do math, were part of a series. I didn't think that was true because I don't consider myself a big series reader. So I wanted to kind of go over my most read authors for the year, my top 3. I guess I should do this in the opposite way, but I'm just going to give you first place first, which was Miss Robin Hobb. I read 13 of her books. In fact, that 13 book fantasy series I mentioned, they were her books. On average, I rated her books a 4.19. This was all like Realm of the Elderlings. I had read the first trilogy of that series in 2024. I had like 3 trilogies and then 1 quartet to finish. My favorite, I think, was Mad Ship, which was the second in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. And then my least favorite was honestly all of the Rainwild Chronicles, but I just picked the first Rainwild Chronicle, Dragon Keeper. Those Rainwild Chronicles are what really drew her average down. My second most read author, which if you've seen any of my previous videos probably would not be surprised, is John Steinbeck. I read 11 of his books this year. He is pretty much my favorite author right now, at least. And I gave his books an average rating of 4.29, which again sounds pretty accurate thinking about how much I really enjoyed reading his books this year. My favorite book of his that I read this year was The Grapes of Wrath. This is not the last time I will mention The Grapes of Wrath in this video. And then my least favorite, which is still pretty good, is Travels with Charlie. When I was reading it, I was pretty ambivalent towards it. Since I finished it and I've given myself probably 6 months, I've grown more towards it. And then my third most read author of the year, which you can see a big drop off after second place, is Hilary Mantel, I don't know. I read 4 of her books this year. I read Wolf Hall the end of 2024, so I finished up that trilogy with Bring Up the Bodies and The Mirror and the Light like the first week of 2025. And then I read 2 more of her books, A Place of Greater Safety and her short story collection. On average, I rated her 4.375. So you can see out of all of my top authors, all of them were rated above 4 stars. And then as I read less of their books, their average rating increased, which I think just makes sense. Hilary Mantel, if I had only read 3 of her books this year, I think she still would have been my 3rd place author, because I don't think I read any more than 2 from any other author. And her average rating was probably have been like a 4.5 or a 4.75, because I think there was only 1 book of hers I rated below a 4.25. And that was my least favorite of hers, which was The Assassination of Margaret Thatcher, which was that short story collection. But my favorite of hers was Bring Up the Bodies, shortly followed by A Place of Greater Safety. I wanted to give a shout out to some of my favorite characters that I met this year. First up, Rosa Sharon from Grapes of Wrath. I love her. And you know what? I don't know what the consensus on her character is, because I know she is throughout the book kind of portrayed, she's kind of like the punching bag of everyone in the book. Everyone hates her. Everyone thinks that she complains too much. But you know what? I would have been so much worse than Rosa Sharon was. If I was in her place, I would have been the most insufferable person in the world. I think she handled it with a lot more grace. And I think all of her family just wanted someone to like make the scapegoat, so they made it her, because she's easy to pick on because she's a woman. She's a pregnant, quote unquote, hysterical woman, but you know what? She has good reason to be hysterical. And at the end of the day, I think John Steinbeck knew that, even though he was the one bullying her. I think he knew that she was one of the best characters that he had created, because that ending, her ending and that ending of the book, so good. Okay, next, Thomas Cromwell from Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. Of course, not the real Thomas Cromwell, but her character of Thomas Cromwell. I spent a lot of time with him. I still think about him. Next, we have Paragon from Live Ship Traders. Yeah, I like a ship. He's a magic ship who can talk and move and has a lot of messed up things going on in his psyche, you know, in his brain, if ships can have brains. But you know what? I loved him. He did everything wrong and he should have been worse. Next, we have Vanessa from My Dark Vanessa. Vanessa is my Dark Vanessa. I love her. She is going through the worst thing ever, right? She's going through a lot. She's a terrible person because of it. She is incredibly mean and dismissive and isolated because of her trauma. I loved every second of it. Again, I think she should have actually been a little bit worse. Next, we have Piranesi from Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. This is the opposite, where this character is like so wholesome and so innocent and naive, and I loved him. He made me cry. This was just a reminder that like you don't need the gritty, dark anti-hero all the time. Sometimes you can just give us a good person as a protagonist. That can still be interesting and compelling. And honestly, he was what I needed when I was reading it. Next, we have Setha from Beloved. Honestly, I almost put Paul D on this as well, because I love Setha and Paul D so much, but Setha is just one of my favorite female characters of all time. I think probably one of the most memorable female, at least American female characters of all time. The things that she has to go through and then her emotional journey in Beloved is so good. I think about the line, you've got 2 legs, Setha, which I might be paraphrasing, but whatever. I think about the impact of that line all the time. Yeah, Setha's story just makes me cry. Next, we have another historical fiction character, Camille Desmoulins in A Place of Greater Safety by Hilary Mantel. I went feral for this little twink. I'm not kidding. I went feral for him when I was reading A Place of Greater Safety. I have a personal beef with Robespierre now because of what he did to Camille. If I could, I would go find where his grave is and I would dig him up and I would behead him again, because how dare you do what you did to my boy Camille, okay? He's a bisexual, chaotic mess, and he deserved better, and I love him forever. I'm not kidding. He's the historical figure I have the biggest crush on, and he's been dead for 200 years, so this is just a stock photo. I forgot to replace it, and also I couldn't find one. John Ames from Marilyn Robinson's Gilead. He's just an old man. He's just an old man contemplating death and like grieving for his son, that his son won't get to have a father in his life. He's way too smart for me. He is way too intellectual. He has read all of these Christian books that I've never even heard of. He's also way too Christian for me, to be honest. But I found his voice so compelling. I just think he was such a nice, gentle man who was really just trying to do his best. And I love him. Next, we have Alexandra Bergsum from O Pioneers. O Pioneers might be the book out of all of these that I gave the lowest rating to. I mean, I still think I gave it like a 3.5 or 3.75, but I didn't love it, but I loved Alexandra Bergsum. I just think I really appreciated how strong she was allowed to be, how she was able to, prove and use her intelligence and be recognized as a great businesswoman in like the late 1800s on the prairie or something, while at the same time still keeping some like softness, still keeping some femininity, which a lot of like modern female characters I think are written to do now. If they are strong, they're always strong, and they're not really allowed to sometimes show those softer aspects of themselves. And so I just really loved how Alexandra was both. I thought her relationship with her brother was very touching, and again, she was very intelligent, independent woman. And then finally, the freakiest of the freaks on this list is Joseph Wayne from To a God Unknown. Another man I went feral for. My jaw dropped so many times reading his thoughts. He is crazy. I think out of all of them, if I met, well, Thomas Cromwell probably, but like out of all of these people, if I met them in person, Joseph Wayne would probably be the person I would hate the most in real life. But I loved reading about him. He's just a freak. He's crazy, and he needs serious help. And I thought he was a great protagonist. Next, I want to give a shout out to some of the best covers from books I read this year. So first up, Bring Up the Bodies. Not going to be the last time I mention this one either. One of my favorite covers of all time, specifically this one, the portrait of Anne Boleyn, where it's cut off right on her head. It hasn't like cut her off completely. She's staring right into you. I love it so much. Then we have Stag Dance by Tori Peters. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous girls, gorgeous gowns. If I could get this as like a painting and hang it on my wall, I would. Then we have The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. I read this book because of this cover, and it was a pretty good book as well, but I absolutely love this cover. The Great State of West Florida by Kent Wascom. This is a movie poster. This is a movie poster. And you know what? It kind of did feel like I was watching like a 1970s futuristic techno punk movie while I was reading it. And finally, The Pretender by Joe Harkin. I think you can maybe tell I have a thing for like portraits, historical kind of looking portraits, but The Pretender looks so great as a book cover, but also just to give you a feel of the book as well. I think all of these covers do that. They're beautiful images, but then they also convey a lot about what the book is as well, which is the thing a book cover should do. But yeah, if I had to judge a book on a cover, these would be the 5 that I would read. Next, I want to give a shout out to, I think I have 6 books here, that these were the books that I read that I think had the least amount of reviews on Storygraph. Now, Storygraph already has less reviews than something like Goodreads, but I figured it would be a good enough clue about which books I read were actually the least popular. It's unlikely we've heard many people talk about these books this year. The first one was High John the Conqueror. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I think this one had like less than 100 reviews. I don't know if I can necessarily recommend it. I gave it a 2-star. Next was Memoirs from Beyond the Grave. Now, this is probably the most actually well-known of these books, at least historically, but I think it had, again, like 100, 200 reviews on Storygraph. It's not really that frequently read by your average, everyday, like modern reader. And this was actually the last book that I read in the year of 2025. Next, we have Kai Miller's Things I Have Withheld. I read this for a book club, and it's a memoir from Kai Miller, who was primarily a poet. I think I said it was a memoir. It's more essay-like, although a lot of it is very unique to his life. And it just talks about how he goes through life as a Caribbean man. He's from Jamaica, a Black Caribbean gay man in the world, and how all of those identities kind of intersect and how they impact how he approaches conversations, what he says or does not says, and then how he can tell what other people are holding back from conversations with him. Then The Great State of West Florida by Kent Wascom. Again, not many people have read this book. Interestingly, George R. R. Martin's A Song for Lie was on here. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think all of these were below 400 reviews. So George R. R. Martin is obviously a very famous author, but not many people have read any of his books besides A Song of Ice and Fire series, which was true for my case until this year. And then one of the last books I read for the year as well was Winter Love by, I believe it's Hans Suyen. I tried to look it up and I found both pronunciations and then not much else because she's not a really big author in this space. So if you know how to pronounce this name, please let me know in the comments down below. But gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous prose. I wanted to give out some, basic awards. So the longest book I read was Assassin's Fate, which was the last book of The Realm of the Elderlings. It was 978 pages. Both the shortest short story I read, at least, I probably did read shorter short stories in a collection of short stories, but I just logged that as one book, so it didn't count. But this one I logged as just one book, so it won. But also probably the best short story I read this year was The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy at 53 pages. Some of my new favorite authors were Paul Murray, Eliza Clark, Marilyn Robinson, and Susanna Clark. All of these except for Susanna Clark, I've only read one book for them so far, so I'm not really ready to say for sure like they're my favorite authors, but these were the authors that I read for the first time this year that most probably surprised me with how much I really enjoyed their work. So these are ones that I definitely want to get to their backlog or whatever other books they have really soon. And then the most overhyped book I read this year, and one of my least favorite books of the entire year, although I don't think I mention it again in my least favorite books list, but one of my least favorite books was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This has over 1 million reviews on Storygraph. It is the most popular book I had read this year. And I did not like it. I did not like it. And I think a lot of people really like it. And I just didn't. I don't know if I feel strong enough about it anymore to say I hated it, but I gave it a 2-star, and I thought that was a very fair and perhaps even generous review. Okay, speaking of books I did not like, I wanted to talk about some dishonorable mentions. Most of these books on this list are some of my least favorite books of the year. I'm not necessarily saying they're the worst books ever. If you like these books, that's totally fine. I'm just saying, for whatever reason, they're not my favorite books. That's why I'm using least favorite instead of worst, okay? Not all of these are books I really disliked, so I kind of split it up between, on the left you have just bad, like I just think these are bad books, and then you have disappointing. So you'll see some of my disappointing reads I actually rated relatively high, but I was disappointed by them because they were like so hyped. So I think it will make sense as we just go through it. So first, in the just bad category, I, Medusa, and in parentheses is the last name of the author. So my little review of this is that I, Medusa, should have a better side to my story. And that's not what this was. First up in the disappointing column was Bunny. I hate literary metaphors and I hate weird girl lit. And also, this wasn't even that weird. But no, this is the book that taught me that I hate weird girl lit. I just need more than this girl's kind of crazy and it's so weird. Now, I did give Bunny like 2 stars, but again, it's not in like just bad in my opinion side. It disappointed me because it was pretty hyped up. House in the Cerulean. I don't even know if I spelled cerulean right there. C. I don't know. I liked the kids being cute, but like stop with the magical racism allegories. It just does not work. It doesn't work, especially in a cozy book like this. Demon Copperhead. Now, I gave it 4 stars, but I expected to give it 6. I thought I was going to absolutely love this book so much. And you know what? I barely even think about it now. The Alchemist. Not short enough. And it's already pretty short. But you know what? It's so mind-numbingly repetitive. Blood Over Brighthaven. 3.5 stars. But it was very hyped. Like, people are saying like it's one of the best fantasy books they've ever read. And I just don't think it challenged me enough. Next in my disappointing is A Farewell to Arms, and perhaps A Farewell to Hemingway. I gave this one a 2.75. Did not vibe with it much at all. I just don't think Hemingway is my type of guy. 5 Broken Blades. How did this get published? And if I had to pick out my least favorite book of the entire year, and also the book that I think is the worst book I've read, which again, I don't like to use that word because if you like this book, you can read it. This one's definitely my least favorite, and I think is objectively perhaps the poorest written. And I do have an asterisk next to this, because this is one of the books that I DNF'd. I DNF'd this 30 pages in, and I know people are gonna be like, you can't give a review, you can't. First off, this is not a review. I didn't give it a rating on Storygraph, okay? I just marked it as DNF and explained why I couldn't finish it. And if I cannot finish your book because it is so incredibly poorly written that it was literally making me angry, then that means that I can say that it's a bad book. And I've heard how this book ends, and I assure you, reading the ending would not have been able to change my opinion on this. So I really do not know how this book got published in this quality. Speaking of disappointing, The Historian. Making Dracula boring and lame is punishable by extenuation, especially if you make me sit through 700 pages. The first 300 pages of this book, I was so locked in, but it goes on for another 400 pages, and then the ending is the most wimpy, weak ending I've ever seen in my entire life. The Ministry of Time. It tried to do way too many things and thus failed at them all. The Unworthy. This retroactively made me like Tender is the Flesh more. Aesthetics and creepy crawlers does not make a novel. You have to give me more than that. The Prior of the Orange Tree should not have been a page over 500, and it was 850. So And then When We Lost Our Heads, this made me question my own taste because I had read The Capital of Dreams by Heather O'Neill earlier in the year and I had loved it. I had almost given it 5 stars. I ended up giving it 4.75. And then I read this and I was like, ooh, did I do I have good taste? Like, do I like this author or do I not? So there you go. Those were my, I guess, dishonorable mentions of books. Okay, moving on to my favorite books. And there's a lot on here because why be limited? I don't believe in this whole top 10 favorite books thing. I don't believe in that, no. 10 is a made-up number, okay? We all just settled on 10 for some arbitrary reason, and I read 120 books this year. I have a lot of favorite books of the year, and I want to talk about them all. So how I ended up doing this is I made a list of like 50 books that I liked. I just went through my entire reading list of the year, and every book that I was like, oh, I liked that, I wrote it down. And then I went through the list and I did like absolute yeses, which I think I have 13. So these are like absolutely, they're my favorite books. And then I had my next in of like, oh my gosh, if I have to leave these ones out, like I'm gonna freak out, like I have to. And then I have a list of honorable mentions. So I think I have like 30 books. I don't know how many books I have, and you're just gonna have to sit through them. So for my honorable mentions, these are not in any particular order. I think they might be in reading order. I'm not sure though. Boy by Nicole Galland. This is a great historical fiction set in Shakespeare, London, England, and it's got a lot of fun stuff about gender and how we perform gender. The Pretender by Joe Harkin, another great historical fiction set during the Tudor era, Henry VII. I feel like any of those types of stories or tropes that deal with like a lost prince raised to be the best ruler, you would really like this book. Then we have Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God. I gave this one a 5 star, and some of these books on my honorable mentions, I did give 5 stars, which is why I have to include them. One of the best, not just like opening lines or opening paragraphs, one of the best first pages of a book I've ever read. That entire first page, magnificent. Stag Dance by Tori Peters. I really loved like 2 of the short stories in this book, and then I kind of liked 2 was indifferent on the other 2 stories, but the 2 stories that I loved, I gave like 5 stars. I love them, and I still think about them. In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. It was good. Everything surrounding this book with his life and then the lives of, the perpetrators, and also just how important it was to true crime, to nonfiction in general, is what really kind of captivates me about this. The Hours by Michael Cunningham. I'm already kind of needing a reread of this because it was just so good. I sped through this thing. I think I read it in like a day. And the ending where everything comes together on these 3 women's lives and you see how they're united blew my mind out of the water. Passing by Nella Larson. I mean, speaking of a great ending, one of the best endings of any book I read this year. That 110% made this book for me. The Picture of Dorian Gray. I was shipping Dorian Gray and Lord Henry so hard in the first chapter. And then now it's kind of like if I see Dorian Gray, it's on site. I don't know if there are like Dorian Gray defenders who like, yes, I feel bad for him because he regressed, but like I hate this man. Okay, because what he did, I can't even remember his name, but what he did to 2 of those characters, no. Me and Dorian Gray are not friends. Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I just love reading about mountaineering disasters and like mountaineering in general because I will never step foot on a mountain, as this book convinced me was a sound strategy to go through life with. But one of the best kind of adventure go wrong books out there. The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. It's very sad how I think relatable some of like the commentary on the medical healthcare system still is. The Pastures of Heaven by John Steinbeck. Not his best work, but I am obsessed with the kind of framing of this story that really kind of asks the question, is America cursed? Can a land be cursed by the way that it is like, that it was violently quote unquote found and colonized? And what does that mean for the people who, the ancestors of those who colonized? That is what I think about when I think about this book. I don't know if that was Steinbeck's intention, but that was my interpretation. And then I already mentioned it, but Winter Love, very short sapphic romance set during World War II with a lot of depth in the themes, in the characters, and in the writing. So these were my next in. I just could not leave them out. From now, it's roughly going to be in order from my least to my favorite, right? So roughly. So this is Mad Ship, and I'm just kind of using this as a stand-in for all of the Realm of the Elderlings. I'm just kind of grouping all the 13 books that I read this year. I definitely needed to have them on my list. There were lots of up and downs with this series. There were times like the Mad Ship, I was so high on it. The next book in this series, the Ship of Destiny, which was the 3rd book in this trilogy that wrapped up this storyline, I'm not gonna lie, I was so into it until 80% of the way through, and there's something that happened that I still hate to this day and do not understand and think it was a terrible character and story choice. And there were things like that in all of these books, so it's not a perfect series for me, but I spent so much time with Fitz and the Fool and Night Eyes and Paragon and everyone that it is incredible world building, and especially just the study of these characters. Next we have Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. If I have the hours on my honorable mentions, of course I have to have the OG. I remember when I was reading this, I was actually very frustrated with my reading experience, and I think I gave it a 4-star when I finished it. But ever since I finished it, which was probably in February or March of 2025, I think about this book very fondly. Septimus was almost made my list of favorite characters, and now that I don't have to like struggle through the writing and to understand what she's saying, now that I can just think about the impact that her words and the feeling that she left on me, I love it. Then we have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Just so atmospheric and compelling, because there's so many different levels of interpretation that you can have to it. I still kind of question like how much of Max and our narrator's story is a true romance, is a true love story. There's a lot of toxicity there too. How much of what we know about Rebecca from Max, from Mrs. Danvers, from, her cousin is true. Did anyone ever know Rebecca? And, what was her final act really about? I have so many questions about it still, and I still think about it. Yeah, fantastic. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman made me cry, made me frustrated, but I really just love that sometimes you just need that reminder. You're not going to know the answers to some things, and you're not going to know the answers to the most important things perhaps in life. And it's really not your job to find out. I mean, if you want to waste your time and spend your life trying to find out why we're here, go ahead, you can, but I don't know if it's going to make you any happier in the end. The Moon is Down by John Steinbeck. Listen, it's a great little novella, and it was made greater by the kind of meta context around it about how this was actually spread through Nazi-occupied Europe, and how many people who read it during that time really appreciated it, and it helped them. I don't even really remember many of the characters' names or many specifics other than like the end, and also how it made me feel like I could stand up to tyranny and violence, even knowing what would be my final fate. And I think any book that can inspire that feeling in someone is good. And yes, this book was pretty much US commissioned propaganda. And you know what? I think propaganda against the Nazis is good, actually. Again, especially if it gives people suffering under them true hope and feels like their experiences are being seen. So yeah. Next, Enline by Maria Riva would have been my pick to win the Booker, although to be fair, I only read 3 books on the long list this year, so don't listen to me. But quirky, funny, sad, fourth wall breaking, really played with form, what a story is, what a character is, and how much control a writer has over a story. I really loved like everything that I was playing with. The Winter of Our Discontent, Steinbeck's last novel, and perhaps behind The Grapes of Wrath, his second most relevant novel still today. Lovely. Okay, next we have my absolute yeses. So we have to go fast on these. I feel like I've already been talking for so long, but these were the 13 that when I went through my list the first time, I was like, yes, of course they're one of my favorites. And again, rough order of ranking. So these first ones up will be at the lower end of my list. Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, specifically just the first book. I loved the first book, 5 stars. I flew through this like 500-page book in 12 hours. I could barely put it down. It is young adult, and I'm pretty harsh on young adult. I don't really have a lot of patience for it. This book had me giggling. It had me like blushing. I was honestly so locked into this love triangle, which is not a favorite trope of mine. And again, between teenagers, like what? Tracy Deonn uses like this fantasy kind of, a backdrop for her story, but at the heart of the story, it is about a young woman grieving the loss of her mother. And that is the emotional heartbeat of the story. And so that's why I think it works so well, because there's some young adult, tropes in there, but I think almost anyone could read this story and appreciate the core of it. And I definitely did. Next, we have Eliza Clark's Penance. Floored me. I was perhaps one of my most surprising 5-star reads of the year. I still think about some of these quotes. I think she nailed not just like girlhood, political friendship drama, but also fandom, online fandom culture. It made me laugh out loud. It made me cry. And it just really blew my mind what she was able to do. And one of my favorite quotes of this book, which I still quote all the time, is "Get off your high horse You're literally reading school shooting fanfic. Iconic line. Then we had Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. I already talked about this earlier. Piranesi is really one of my favorite characters. The first third of this book, I was so lost. I almost gave up on it. And then there's a part, there's a couple times when Susanna Clarke is kind of talking to you through these characters, and she's pretty much saying don't worry about figuring out. You don't need to figure anything out. Just sit and experience the story and let it tell itself for you. And I appreciated that. It came at the exact moment I needed it to kind of push through. She keeps the mystery just long enough. And it actually does not stay on for much longer. Once you kind of reach your max frustration point of okay, please tell me what's going on, she finally does. And I think it's paced beautifully. I can see why some people don't really like the reveals in it, but I liked it. Then we had Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. Cyrus almost made it to my favorite character list as well. I just love a depressed boy, I guess. Here's the thing, I read this probably in February, so I don't have the best memory of it, but again, I remember how it made me feel. I sobbed at the end of this book. The ending itself is kind of vague and up to interpretation. I came up with a reading of it that meant a lot to me, that I also think fit very well with the rest of the themes in the book, and I just really recommend you read it for yourself. Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. I think this book is really famous still for how it depicted apartheid in South Africa, but my favorite thing about this was the more personal story as opposed to the geopolitics of it all, although I think that was still very well done and a good setting for the story. But the personal relationship between our main narrator and his son and everyone else that he meets on his journey to reunite with his son was so good. This book is split into 3 parts. The first part was good, and I was okay, but it was really at the beginning of the second part that I started to realize what Alan Paton was doing, and I saw where the story was going, how it was widening its scope and making it so much more emotionally impactful. And then the second and third parts just delivered on so much. So yeah, Cry the Beloved Country, I don't know, it made me cry. It has some of the most beautiful poetic writing of any of the books I read this year. I think I underlined and highlighted a lot of this book, so again, just really recommend it. And then we have My Dark Vanessa. I'm gonna sound like a broken record. It made me cry. All of my favorite books make me cry. This was about 350 pages. I read this in one day. I flew through it. I could not put it down, even when it got disgusting and gross and very detailed in the abuse that Vanessa suffered at the hands of a much older man. Even when I wanted to slap Vanessa across the face because she was being so stubborn and blind and mean to people who were trying to help her. Her emotional journey to understanding the truth about what happened to her, to really realizing what was done to her and how bad it is, and how long it kind of takes her to accept the truth of what happened to her when she was 15, I think is just gorgeous, beautiful, and I think it's a book that a lot of younger people should read, because I think if they're old enough to be a potential victim of something like this, then they should be armed with a book that will teach them the warning signs and teach them the lifelong consequences of something that might seem harmless to them at the time, or even empowering to them at the time, because they are finally being treated like the adults that they believe they are. Then we have To a God Unknown by John Steinbeck. This is, I think, currently in my top 3 of his works, and it's not his best work, but I love Joseph Wayne. I think the way that Steinbeck lets this freak be a freak, lets this freak want to mount with cows, and lets this freak marry the earth and hump the earth. He literally humps his land and is wow, it was almost like I was married to the grass right there for a second. And I'm sitting here what? It, to me, says a lot about how humans find comfort in rituals, whether it be the prescribed religion of the time place, which makes it acceptable, or, a throwback to another time or religion, which makes it taboo. Either way, we're still trying to find comfort in a world and believe that these rituals and symbols and beliefs will protect us from a world that seems almost designed to kill us. That was the theme that really stood out to me and fascinated me so much about this book. Again, like all Steinbeck works, has a fantastic ending, and it's definitely his weirdest novel. This is Steinbeck's version of Weird Girl Lit, which apparently I do like. Then we have Marilyn Robinson's Gilead. Fantastic writing. That's what it is. It's fantastic writing. It's so gentle. It is so compassionate. It's very compassionate, and it is very heavily influenced by Christianity. I think it was such a beautiful and in some ways pure manifestation of Christianity that I really was moved by it and moved by the type of faith that was displayed in this book. It talks about family. It talks about the history of slavery in this country. It talks about what are our duties to fight against what we believe to be, oppression or injustice, and what we owe our neighbors and our friends and our family. Place of greater safety. Like I said before, this book made me have personal beef with Robespierre, who's been dead for 200 years. It is funny. It is terrifying. It is thrilling. It is a chronicling of the French Revolution, which leaves you as confused as you probably would have been if you were alive during that time. It's also like bisexual throuple drama everywhere throughout this book. All three of the main characters, Desmoulins, Robespierre, and Danton, feel like fully fledged characters. Throughout the book, you love them, and then you hate them, and then you love and hate them at the same time. And it's got Hilary Mantel's fantastic writing. Speaking of Hilary Mantel's fantastic writing, Bring Up the Bodies. The second book in her Wolf Hall trilogy, my personal favorite, is so tightly packed and paced and so focused on the downfall of Anne Boleyn, and you know exactly what is going to happen at the end of this book. And still, just like Anne Boleyn, you are looking around at that final moment and going, okay, someone's gonna stop this and change this. Also, this book is very important for Thomas Cromwell's development because you really see his vengeance unleashed. You know, he could have been kinder and he could have stopped certain things, but because of his personal grievances against some of the political people involved in this like scandal, he purposefully went for the jugular on them for his own personal reasons. And this is in some ways a big mistake for him because it brings him to the height of his power. But that was exactly where Anne Boleyn was only a few months ago. It is less confusing than Wolf Hall because I think Hilary Mantel kind of really hones in on her skill, on the way that she's narrating Thomas Cromwell's point of view. And also just, like I said, so tightly focused on Anne Boleyn. There's not all of this other extraneous noise that we had in Wolf Hall and even Mirror in the Light. Then we have Beloved by Toni Morrison. This, like I said, this is one of my rereads. Setha is one of my favorite characters of all time. I also mentioned Paul D and their relationship. I don't know if this is, a fair statement to make, but I consider Beloved to be one of the most romantic books I've ever read. I think Setha and Paul D are such a great duo, and their individual experiences and how their traumas kind of collide and intersect with each other when they're finally, reunited, and then how they have to struggle through their traumas. And they both attempt to do it independently or maybe not even at all, but it's not until they're really together that they can start to not lay to rest, because you can't ever lay to rest that type of trauma, but accept it, acknowledge it, and learn to live with it and live with each other. Beloved herself as a metaphor is one of my favorite metaphors in any book I've ever read. She is terrifying. She is pitiful. She is tragic. And the ending of this book is genius. Like, only Toni Morrison could think about that and write it so beautifully. Okay, so we're down to my final two books of the year. And I was a neck and neck with these two because I read them in the same month. I read my second place book first, and I was like, hands down, this is the best book of the entire year. No way any book tops this. The end of that month, I read my first place book. I was so floored by how much I love that book. So what I'll say is, I think I told you I had 21 5 stars this year. I think I gave 17 of those 5 stars, 16 or 17 of those 5 stars within the first 7 months. From January to July, I gave like 17 5 stars. And then I read my number one book. And after that point, it completely blew me up. I stopped rating like all of the books I read from August through December because I could not figure out where to put them on my rating scale, because this number one book, this 5-star read, like blew up my scale, because it really wasn't a 5-star read. It was like a 6, and so was the second place book too. But I was able to read the second place book and then immediately give like 2 other 5 stars in that same month. But after this, I could not give any book after I read it a 5-star for like months. I only gave 4 other 5 stars throughout the rest of the year. And I think it's because of this number one book, like putting me in the biggest reading slump because nothing could reach its heights. So my second place book, to my shock and even a little bit my horror, is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Loved it. One of my favorite endings of all time. Just fantastic. I don't know what else to say about this book. I love Rosa Sharon. I love almost everything Steinbeck is doing in this book. Some of the race stuff, when I read this book, I was ready to go get my guillotine. This book is just so brilliant on so many levels. It is impossible to talk about it all. And I felt like The Grapes of Wrath was the safe pick for my number one choice, because I have no fear whatsoever that on any single day that I decide to reread this, however many times I reread it, it will never lose its potence. It'll never lose its impact on me. I am a little scared about my number one pick not maybe living up upon a reread, just because like it's more contemporary, it's more modern, and it hasn't really stood the test of time yet that The Grapes of Wrath already has. It's not the safe choice, but I think just given how hard it was for me to find anything as good as this book for the entirety rest of even the 4 other books I gave 5 stars to, not even close to how much I loved my number one pick, which was The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. A very controversial pick because I think a lot of people hate this book. They don't like how experimental kind of is. They don't like the lack of punctuation and the no quotation marks. A lot of people don't like the end. The ending is what made this book for me. The ending is fantastic. I'm 110% bought into that ending completely. Yes, it is abrupt, but that does not mean it is bad. This book sent me spiraling. It is, I think, very well layered. It has, just like The Grapes of Wrath, a lot of meaning, and I don't think it's ever something that I can fully articulate. But you know what? It made me feel so much. And it's long. It might be a little too long. It could do with being cut. I mean, so could The Grapes of Wrath, in my personal opinion. So none of these books are 110% perfect, but The Bee Sting was my favorite read of 2025. So I know I've already been talking for a while, but I did want to shout out some other books. You know, we talked about my least favorites. We've talked about my most favorites. But what about books that I haven't mentioned yet? I read 120. I want to talk about as many books as I can. So rapid fire, here are about like 10 other books that I just want to mention for one reason or another. A Dowry of Blood, all tell, no show, and no tension. It almost made my like dishonorable mentions as one of my least favorite books of the year. City of Nightbirds, award for most boring. Oh my god, nothing about this book was engaging whatsoever. Donna Tartt's The Secret History. I have a feeling people prefer the first half of this book to the second, and they are wrong. The second half of this book is so good. The first half of this book, I almost DNF'd like 3 times. There were multiple chapters where I was like, I'm not doing this. And then like the second half of the first part, I was like, okay, I'm getting into it. And then the second part of this book, fantastic. So I don't know what the discourse is around this book on like which part is more. I just have a feeling that people prefer the first half because I think that's when it's like the most dark academia because they're actually in school going to class, and those were my least favorite parts. But the second half, because of all of the dramatic irony, chef's kiss. Flesh. This is an insult to Hilary Mantel's legacy. She did not win 2 Booker prizes in a row, and she honestly should have won a third for The Mirror and the Light, but whatever. She did not win 2 Booker prizes in a row for Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies just for 20 years later you to give Flesh the same prize? This is nowhere near. Okay, and I haven't read all the other Bookers in between there, okay? I have read more than just those 2, but like, no. I refuse. More shoutouts. We're almost done, I promise. The Glass Castle, I just wanted to shout it out. One of my favorite memoirs that made me cry. The Capital of Dreams, I mentioned this before, by Heather O'Neill. Incredible, and this was the O'Neill book I loved. And that ending recontextualized like the entire book. You could go back through the entire thing, and so many little question marks that you had at the time where you're like, I don't know what she means by that, but like, okay, whatever. You just kind of move on. It recontextualizes everything. A Passage to India surprised me by just how like anti-colonialist it was. I'm sure it's used or studied a lot, and I'm sure it hasn't quite aged the best, but I was very impressed for a book written by a British man in 1920s for the message it had, and I just wasn't expecting any of it. They Were Her Property by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, perhaps my favorite nonfiction altogether. It didn't make my favorites list because I'm just prone towards fiction. I'm probably never gonna love a nonfiction all the way as much as I love my favorite fiction. And it's definitely like the most academic of the nonfiction I read this year, and I think it was my favorite. I think about it a lot. And then the last book I'm going to mention is just Between Two Fires because it made me want to rewatch Supernatural, and it also moved Paradise Lost up on my TBR list by like 20 spots because I really liked Between Two Fires, but because of its subject matter about like demons and devils and this epic battle of good versus evil and heaven versus hell, again, it made me think about Supernatural, and I just know I'm going to read Paradise Lost and then maybe reread Between Two Fires and see a lot more references. All right. Thank you so much for watching. I'm sure the lighting has changed quite a lot because the sun has slowly gone down into the sky. I apologize for that. Sorry I yapped for too long, but that was my 2025 Wrapped. Hopefully it was engaging enough, and thanks for watching. Now I'm going to stop talking about books so that I can go actually read some more books for 2026. Have a good day.